you that I don't know, we want to extend an especially warm welcome to some of our guests. We have people here from other Unitarian Universalist congregations in the area, and we have at least one person from Emerson, UU and Marietta, Debbie in the back, and we have some people here from UU Metro Atlanta North, and we have quite a few folks here from Northwest. I don't know if there's other UU congregations represented or people just in the general community, but welcome everybody to our program this evening. The mass murder of 20 children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14th was one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. It was second only to the 2007 massacre at Virginia Tech. As a country, this tragedy left us horrified, and it has also renewed the national debate about gun control. The conversations and proposals from Congress, the President, special interest and advocacy groups have included requiring universal background checks. They've included a ban on the manufacture and sale of semi-automatic weapons and magazines, and appropriating funds to hire armed police officers in every American school to protect students. Those are just some of the proposals that are being discussed. So as concerned citizens and people of faith, what can we do in the wake of this national tragedy? How can we engage in productive dialogue with persons of different opinions and come together for the safety and welfare of our children, our schools, and of our communities? So with us tonight, we're going to explore these questions with 3 distinguished panelists. We're very delighted to have them with us this evening. The first is Alice Johnson. She is the Director of Georgians for Gun Safety. And joining her is going to be Kathryn Grant, who is the Community Catalyst for the Georgia chapter of the Campaign to Keep Guns Off Campus. And then finally joining them will be Michael Maneely, founding attorney of the Maneely firm, which is a family law firm with offices in Marietta and Savannah. How to move forward post-Sandy Hook is a complicated matter, and our panelists tonight will hopefully shed some light on these issues and actions that will help us all. So we're going to begin with, I'll be doing some introductions, and afterwards each panelist is going to take some time to make some remarks. And following their remarks, we're going to have some Q&A from me, your moderator, as well as any questions that come up for you during our program this evening. I'll start by introducing first Alice Johnson. Alice is the Volunteer Director for Georgians for Gun Safety, which is a nonprofit advocacy organization made up of concerned citizens who are working to reduce death and injuries by firearms in Georgia. While the focus of Georgians for Gun Safety is on education and communication, the organization also tries to bring balance to the gun safety debate in the Georgia General Assembly. Alice has led the legislative effort to reduce gun violence in Georgia since 1993. She became involved with the issue as a direct result of working with high school students in her role as executive director of the Jean Childs Young Institute for Youth Leadership, which is a position that she held for over 12 years. In 2005, Georgians for Gun Safety created a nonprofit organization which is called Educating Georgians for Gun Safety, which seeks to provide guidance to local communities and law enforcement on violence reduction strategies. And Alice serves as director of both of these organizations. She's a volunteer director for both. And Alice says she credits her commitment to gun violence prevention to the young people and police officers she has known who face dangers of community violence every day. She's done consulting on public safety issues to the Atlanta Police Department, the City of Atlanta. She has also convened the City Safe Summit, taking action on illegal drugs and guns in 2005 and 2006 for Mayor Shirley Franklin. And she's also worked on a variety of other public safety issues, including training for law enforcement on domestic violence and child sex trafficking. So very distinguished panelists, welcome tonight, Alice. And to her left is Kathryn Grant. Kathryn is the Community Catalyst for the Georgia chapter of the Campaign to Keep Guns Off Campus. Advocating common sense gun policy, Kathryn works to educate students, teachers, and administrators about proposed legislation that would allow guns in schools. Founded in 2008 by Andy Pelosi in the aftermath of the Virginia Tech tragedy, the campaign has since formed a national community of over 355 colleges and universities in 40 states that stand in opposition to guns on campus, including the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. Kathryn's family roots trace back 8 generations to Monroe County, Georgia. She was born and raised in Japan, and she's lived and worked in Tokyo, Washington, D.C., London, and Los Angeles. And in 2002, she moved back to Atlanta, where she directed nonprofit housing development and marketing communication programs for the area's leading for-profit residential home builders. We're delighted to have you here, Kathryn. And then finally, to her left is Michael Maneely. Michael is the founding attorney of the Maneely firm. He's also a member here at Northwest. Michael has practiced law for over 23 years and handled over 2,000 cases. He is admitted to practice in all Georgia courts and federal courts in the Northern and Middle Districts of Georgia, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and the United States Supreme Court. And Michael has built a progressive practice and a reputation for winning difficult, controversial, and high-profile cases. He has successfully represented hundreds of mothers and fathers in state, federal, and international divorce, custody, and child support cases. And just 2 examples of Michael's and his firm's success. After a lengthy Hague abduction trial, Michael brought back 2 little girls from Cyprus where they had been unlawfully retained by their mother. In November, Michael prevented a mother from boarding a flight to Nigeria with the party's child after only 24 hours notice by coordinating the assistance of the State Department, Homeland Security, Atlanta Hartsfield International Airport, and the Atlanta Police Department. And just this past week, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled unanimously in favor of one of Michael's clients, Sergeant Jeffrey Chafin, who claimed custody of his 6-year-old daughter, overruling a lower court decision that the daughter remain with her mother in Scotland. And apparently just yesterday, the Supreme Court ruled on a similar case representing where one of his clients was represented. So very impressive, Michael. Michael graduated from Georgia State University College of Law and organized the Cobb County branch of the Georgia State University College of Law Alumni Association, and he has many affiliations here in the state and in the county of Cobb. So welcome, Michael. So tonight, we're going to begin by letting the panelists talk to you about their areas of expertise and some of their take on the conversation that's going on nationally about gun control in the wake of Sandy Hook and what we might be able to do about it. So we will start with Alice.
Thank you. It's delightful to be here. I'm very glad to see.
Pulpit?
No.
Okay. You want to use the more?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
No.
No. How is that possible? From a long line of yellers, as my father would say.
Here.
Okay?
Yes.
All right, I'll try to focus. As I said, I come from a long line of yellers, and so it's hard to believe that I can't be heard. I'm delighted to be here tonight, see some people in the audience that I know, people who spend or have spent a great deal of time at the General Assembly where it's just not possible to describe unless you've been down here on numerous occasions, just from the bizarre to the strange on a regular basis. And I wanted to say, first of all, how glad I am to be able to have an opportunity to speak to you about this issue and to share for me what is the most excited and optimistic that I have been about gun violence prevention advocacy work in a very long time. The Reverend said that I've been doing this work for 20 years, and it's true. And I said one of the things is, you know, if you're old enough and you keep showing up in the same places regularly enough, eventually you get a title that will somehow sound good. So I've been doing this work on gun violence prevention for a very long time, and have seen lots and lots of changes, lots and lots of shifts in the movement. Kathryn and her work is a new strain of some wonderful work that needs to be done around young people in colleges and universities in particular. But what I wanted to say first of all is that I really am much more optimistic than I have been. And I'll tell you why. I think for those of us who are old-time organizers, community organizers, there is this discussion, Malcolm Gladwell called it the tipping point. And I think we've finally begun to reach that point. I think it's Sandy Hook, I think it's Gabby Giffords, I think it's the 15-year-old in Chicago, which is my hometown. But it is primarily the president and the vice president. And it hasn't been the kind of national conversation with a positive spin since the days of Clinton, since the days of the Brady Law, when Ronald Reagan was shot, you'll remember that. There is now a political motivation that is demanding that something be done. And it's been a long time. Those of us who have worked on this issue for a while, it's often felt like slogging in the vineyards by yourself, or with a very small cadre of folks. And so it's very exciting in a lot of ways. Of course, in reaction to that, and I think Kathryn's going to talk about it a little bit more, in reaction to that, there is in fact, 40, 50 bills in the General Assembly.
A lot.
Yeah, most of which are not ones that we would support. There are a couple that are intended to make a statement on the side of preventing gun violence, but not very many. And that's, in my opinion, a natural reaction to, or a typical reaction to this political state of affairs. That said, I think we're going to see some important changes in gun policy at the national level, and I think we've already seen some significant shifts in how much of a priority this is now for the American people. And even in Georgia, I think we're beginning to see the possibility that this is becoming a priority for a larger pool of Georgians as well. I will tell you that for us, for Georgians for Gun Safety, the issue has always been about reducing injuries and deaths from firearms. And the question related to that is, where did the gun come from when a criminal act has been committed? Whether that criminal act is related to domestic violence or a burglary, an armed robbery, a homicide. In my other life, the one that pays, I am the Community Affairs Director for the Atlanta Police Department. And the emphasis that I have always felt about nonviolence and particularly about reducing injuries from firearms, injuries and deaths from firearms, has only been further instructed by the work I do with APD, and I can talk about that at some point. But the question for us really is, where did the gun come from? How did it wind up in the hands of someone who is very seriously mentally ill, or a convicted felon, or a domestic abuser, or someone who's had a family violence misdemeanor conviction, or someone who has an active temporary protective order, or is on a terrorist watch list, or is dishonorably discharged from the military. Those are all the prohibitions for being able to possess a firearm in federal law, not state law, in federal law. And so the question becomes more and more and more, where did the gun come from? How did someone who was prohibited from getting a firearm get one? And there are many, many policy issues and decisions that are made that make that possible. And the one you're hearing very much about right now is the issue of universal background checks. 40% of firearms are sold, transferred between people without any kind of background check. And that is legal in Georgia, and it is legal in nationally. There are some states that do not allow that. They have where access is much more controlled. But that issue is probably primary to trying to solve some of the problems that we have seen with gun violence, with crime and gun violence, and it will, in the end, have the most significant impact on answering the question, where did the gun come from, and ultimately blocking folks from getting them. And I want to spend a minute talking about this, if I could, because there's this sort of idea, and I've heard it for a very long time, that somehow if you have $50 you can get a gun anywhere. But the reality is that all firearms, almost exclusively, start out legal, right? They are manufactured by a recognized manufacturer, they have a serial number, and unless they are stolen initiating from in transit, so for instance, unless a shipment is stolen from Glock, right, in Smyrna, you know, Glocks are made in Smyrna, from, you know, in shipment, in transit, you know, on a truck or an UPS truck or something, they all go to a federally licensed firearms dealer, referred to by most of us as an FFL. They are licensed by the federal government, they must report regularly, they are subject to inspection by alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, not as much as we think they should, but they are subject to all of those regulations. And once it goes to an FFL, it's anybody's guess where it goes from there. Usually, the FFL must conduct a background check, must determine if the person they are selling to is a felon, is in violation of any of the prohibitions that I mentioned to you. Once that happens, there's no need, there's no requirement, there's no determination that that gun can be, it has to be sold with a background check after that. So for us, for instance, I'll put on my APD hat for a minute, we trace every firearm that we recover at a crime scene. And what that means is we're going to run the serial number, we're going to run the history of the gun through ATF, through what's a process called E-Trace. But what happens too often is that gun will come back last legally purchased from a federally licensed firearms dealer 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And the person we took it off of, or the crime scene where we responded, is not the guy who bought the gun. It's not the woman who bought the gun. It's been transferred many times since that initial, and there's no record. And so for us in law enforcement, that's a huge source of frustration because we can't track it. We can't figure out who had it last. And so universal background checks will solve that problem, right? You can't transfer a gun, if this passes, without a background check. And that will make a huge difference. Even for the number of firearms that are in circulation now, some of the assault weapons and the director of the commander of the homicide, the narcotics unit told me the other day there's probably 2 million high-capacity magazines in circulation. Yeah, that's a problem. But if we have background checks, if we have universal background checks, then we're going to know who got the next assault weapon, right? We're going to know where that gun was transferred. And if we don't, then we know the person who has it really is not a law-abiding citizen. And that makes it much easier for law enforcement to distinguish. So anyway, those are some of the primary. I think in Georgia we're going to see, well, we're having a debate, but in Georgia I think we're going to see none of these gun bills pass. I'm going to step way out here. And I think that there are some pressure points that we'll recommend to you when we get to that part of the discussion about how to make those pressure points a little bit more felt by some politicians. We'll give you some background and suggestions about that. But I really do think that the combination of the 23 executive orders that President Obama has signed, plus the efforts in Congress and in some states, right? Colorado is passing some stuff we haven't seen in a very long time. There will be pieces of state legislation other places as well that will be remarkable for their effort to respond with common sense and logic to this issue of gun violence. And you know, I can talk more about my optimism, but I'm going to pass it to Kathryn.
And I'm going to balance that optimism
This is the debate we were having a minute ago.
panic.